Have you ever been walking down the street with your best bro, and while you're walking, you accidentally touch hands? You think to yourself, that was weird, but I'm not gay. You are. You are.
People love comparing Invincible to Spider-Man. Obviously makes sense. They have a lot of things in common as characters in terms of the way they act, their humility as people, and the way that they essentially kind of bounce off of the rest of the characters within their world. They both represent that we're the best of humanity, even if they're both not entirely human in their own ways. What if, within that comparison that people are making, they're missing the entire point of Mark Grayson's character? Now, sure, both fight even when they know they'll lose. They both wear colorful costumes, almost so colorful that if they weren't iconic, they'd be considered ugly. And they've also had phases in which those suits have been pretty dark, but beneath the surface, where their motivations would be seen, what they represent are completely different. Mark Grayson's perspective in Invincible, in season 1 at least, we can see the way that Mark interacts with Titan. Mark initially catches Titan robbing a bank. They have an altercation, and later on within that season, early on, we see Titan call Mark over for help.
I called you here because I need your help.
Why would I help you? You're a criminal.
You don't even know what that word means.
And the reason he does this is because he has a crime lord within his neighborhood he needs help with. Case in point, Machine Head, Mr.
I know where your family lives.
Helping people and taking down bad guys.
Yeah?
So help me take down my boss. They don't get any worse than him.
Who's your boss?
Machine Head.
That's not a real name.
Within this interaction, we can see a few things. First off, when Mark first shows up on Titan's callback, Mark initially assumes that Titan is only there for revenge and is there to fight him. Understandable, they just fought. But from this, we can see that Mark sees Titan as just another criminal, not necessarily somebody to help.
Of course you haven't heard of him. You're a rich kid from the suburbs.
What? No? You don't know.
As they continue in their conversation, we see Titan calls Mark out on his privilege. And again, he's not exactly wrong. He points out that Mark has no idea what crime is like in these less fortunate areas, and he's pretty accurate.
Come on, man. Machine Head runs this city. If it's illegal and it makes money, it's his. And when people need to die to keep it that way, he's got muscle like me to take care of it.
Yeah, I'm more like a big picture superhero. Saving the planet, stuff like that. Why don't you give Fight Force a call?
When Titan asks for Mark's help with smaller picture problems, Mark is faced with a defining choice. He can hold on to that mindset that his father gave him.
Remember, you're not just a superhero, Mark. You're a Viltrumite. We have responsibilities.
Thinking about the big picture, which, as an alien that lives for thousands and thousands of years, when you're that alien, that big picture does not really include people who, in comparison, have the lifespan of a gnat.
Sure, man, just fly away. Forget about everyone else down here. Let me show you what you don't see from up there.
What, like right now?
You got somewhere to be?
And we can see Mark is faced with a defining choice. He can listen, empathize, acknowledge this new experience, and integrate it into his worldview, try to account for the people that are easy for someone like him to miss, especially coming from the position that he's come from all his life. Or he can dismiss Titan and keep living in his bubble. Now, we can see from the decision he makes the way that it ends up. These moments shape Mark's character, showing that he doesn't instinctively relate to the little guy the way that Spider-Man does. He has to learn to care. And that's worth a lot. I mean, even if you think initially that means that Mark is somehow less empathetic than Spider-Man, you see that that's not really the case. You just see that Mark has a blind spot to overcome where Spider-Man doesn't. And that's totally fair. They have different backgrounds and different motivations. So let's look at Spider-Man for a minute. 1, he's a broke student fighting crime in the neighborhoods he grew up in. He represents an empowered victim. He's somebody who's been through a lot in his life. He isn't necessarily there to just help the little guy for the sake of it. He has been the little guy. He knows what that's like. He can relate to that. We see that in almost every iteration of Spider-Man. It's in high school, in college, in the workplace, as a superhero even. We can see that this continuously shows him being able to firsthand take that perspective on. We can see that Peter Parker intimately understands struggle. He's lived it. Now let's look at Invincible or Mark Grayson. He grew up in a stable and privileged household. His mother is loving and his father is Omni-Man. His mom was a real estate agent, successful. His father is basically Superman with a better color scheme. And you can also see in Invincible's background that clearly this doesn't represent personal hardship the way Spider-Man's background does. If you watched Invincible, and Invincible took place from Mark being born until Mark was about midway through high school, it's pretty clear he's not had a tough life, right? Nobody can really say that. I mean, almost every flashback we see to his childhood shows he had a great childhood, right? His mom is doting, nurturing. Sure, his father had some blind spots in morality, but we can see that his mother is there to make up for those within the way that she raises Mark. And we can see that within this privilege that Mark has had his whole life, he does have every reason to ignore the struggles of others, even with all the upbringings that he's had. Regardless of all that, he chooses to fight anyway. Season 2 highlights how easily Mark could have followed his father's path. Within Season 2, Angstrom Levy fucking hates Invincible, and we see through his own upbringing as a villain that none of that hatred for Invincible actually comes for hatred of the Mark Grayson we know. Initially you see it and you think to yourself, why the hell would he hate our guy? He's our hero. But you see, in almost every other universe, he's the exception to that rule. Every other Mark Grayson, every other Invincible is an absolutely horrific, vile human/Viltrumite. He does horrific things, from cannibalism to murder to child murder and more. From that characterization, it makes a lot of sense why Angstrom Levy would hate him. He's a walking war crime in most other universes. Now looking at Season 3, this is reinforced. You can see through Oliver's handling.
That's what happens when you're a bad guy.
Of the Mauler twins, that clearly this perspective on life is an easy one to fall into. But Mark Grayson doesn't fall into this, not ours. The key difference between them is Spider-Man fights because he knows what suffering feels like on a first-hand level. To contrast this, Invincible fights because he chooses to understand the struggles that he's never faced. Most alternate versions of Spider-Man, if you remember what I mentioned about Invincible, are still good people. You have the entire Spider-Verse movie, you have the first, the second, the third one that's never coming out, and you can see within those that you have all these other characters. Even when they're not exactly Peter Parker, they've been through something in their lives, and being Spider-Man is a way that they're able to essentially turn around and say, yes, I know what this is like, but I do this because I don't want other people to go through what I've been through. I don't want other people to know struggle. Now, we take this perspective and what I mentioned about Mark before, clearly, most alternate versions of Invincible are not. We see that our Mark Grayson is the rare, if not the only exception to the rule. Almost every Invincible is a horrible person. This isn't a minor distinction. It changes how we view their heroism entirely. Now, yes, both fight crime, wear tight suits, and get beaten up a lot. But reducing them to surface level similarities ignores what makes Mark unique. Invincible isn't just a Spider-Man reskin, he's a completely different kind of hero. Again, while Spider-Man is there because he's essentially fighting his past from becoming the future, Invincible is fighting for a future that he could have ignored because, again, from his perspective, almost every single thing that goes wrong in Invincible is something he could have easily averted if he was just selfish. That's what makes his story so compelling.